My name is Laura Vernon, and I'm the Great Salt Lake Basin Planner with the Utah Department of Natural Resources, Division of Water Resources. That's one of about 9 different divisions within the Department of Natural Resources. And I am super psyched to be talking with you guys today about water planning, because I think that this is an area in the realm of planning that is often missed over and not thought of as much. And over the years, I think I've been involved with APA for about 20 years now. And I've been to countless APA conferences about form-based code and how to write a wicked good general plan, but I rarely hear about water planning. And I feel like when we're living in the second or one of the driest states in the nation, we can't have growth without thinking about water. And so I'm super excited to be able to talk about water in the Great Salt Lake Basin and let you know how we're thinking about it now. So just a titch more about the division. Our mission is to plan, conserve, develop, and protect Utah waterways. And I will just kind of let you know how this basin planning effort is kind of doing a little bit of all of this. But before I start talking about the plan, I just want to make sure that you are all connected to Great Salt Lake. So if I could get a raise of hands, if anybody in here likes anything on this slide, raise your hand. Okay, wonderful. Then you're connected to Great Salt Lake, because if you eat shrimp or fish in the United States, there is a high likelihood that your fish or your shrimp ate harvested or brine shrimp harvested from the Great Salt Lake. So 40% of the country's brine shrimp cysts are harvested off Great Salt Lake and distributed across this country and then around the world for fish production for aquaculture. So when your fish and your shrimp were growing up, they were eating brine shrimp from Great Salt Lake. Historically, 100% of there was a time when 100% of the magnesium that is going into your aluminum cans, which makes your cold drinks very enjoyable, 100% of that magnesium came from Great Salt Lake. Today, that's changed, but and it's even less and less. In fact, production has slowed to a trickle with magnesium. But the historically magnesium harvested from the Great Salt Lake has gone into things like stadium benches and aluminum cans and car parts and plane parts. So again, playing an important role in all of our daily lives. And then if you all enjoy trail mix when you're out on a hike, the chances are that the nuts and the fruit that you enjoyed were harvested or were fertilized, by sulfate of potash, which is produced on Great Salt Lake. And Compass Minerals is the 9th largest producer of sulfate potash in the world. So a lot of our foods are fertilized with fertilizer from Great Salt Lake. And I'm assuming everyone in this room has a cell phone, and a few of you may have a hybrid or electric vehicle. And if you do, you are benefiting from Great Salt Lake. There's companies that are working now to develop lithium to go into our ion batteries that will decrease our reliance on foreign lithium, and we can have be a more local source without depleting water from Great Salt Lake. And how many of you here ski in the winter, snowboard, enjoy the winter sports? Then you all know, and I'm sure you all have heard about the lake effect snow that we all enjoy in the Wasatch Mountains. About 5 to 8% of our annual snowfall is because of Great Salt Lake. The cold air is pulled up off the lake, and then the precipitation, the moisture is deposited in the mountains. And then, of course, with that extra snowfall, we have extra runoff, which provides additional water for all of us to drink. So I hope you're all feeling connected, like your Great Salt Lake matters. It's a part of you. For the record, when I started working on Great Salt Lake issues about 20 years ago, I would be in meetings and people would say to me, well, any water that gets to Great Salt Lake is wasted water. And I know people may still think that today, but I hear that less and less, and that makes my heart grow more and more. So anyway, Some of you may have been around here in the 80s when Great Salt Lake hit its historic high. But sadly, since then, we have been on a pretty severe downward trend since the 86. Overall, the decrease has been more gradual, but since 86, it's been pretty dramatic decrease. And in 2021, we surpassed the historic low that was set in 1963. And then we went and set a new record in 2022. So 2 years in a row, we saw decreases in Great Salt Lake levels that, to the point that we have never seen before. So in 2022, 4188.5 was the new historic low. Oh, geez. All right, so here's the downward trend that I talked about. We've actually been fortunate enough to have data back to 1847 for Great Salt Lake lake level elevation. This data just shows from 1900, and you can see the steep spike in the 80s, but overall it's been a downward trend as we look into the 2020s and beyond. So where does the water come from that flows into Great Salt Lake? Well, about 50% of it comes from the Bear River, about 25% comes from the Weber River, and about 20% from the Jordan, Provo area, and then about 5% from the West Desert. And you can see there too, kind of just steady, slow decreases over time. So who's using the water upstream? Some water makes it to Great Salt Lake, but the water that is used upstream, who's using it? Well, you can see from this blue line here, it's agriculture who is using a large portion of the water. And while they're looking at optimizing some of their practices, they are still by far the largest water user in the basin. Something that is relevant to this crew, municipal industrial use is second. And I think the most fascinating thing about that is that the population in Utah I've been here since 1985, is just grown and grown and grown, and it's growing exponentially in the Great Salt Lake Basin. But the use in the basin from M&I hasn't risen. And so I think that's in large efforts to conservation and more water-wise uses. But the pressure's on, and we need to continue that because we are seeing after the dry years that we did have in 2021 and 2022, we're seeing increased uses after those years. So how do we bring it back down and go even further with reducing the M&I depletions? And then you have other uses are the Great Salt Lake mineral extractors and reservoir uses, evaporation upstream. So what are we looking at today for Great Salt Lake? Well, the current elevation of the south arm of the lake is 4191.9. We had an amazing storm the other day. That was really helpful. Someone told me it went up 4 inches, which is pretty remarkable, but 2 inches just fell at the airport alone, so 2 inches on the lake bed. But this chart here shows the elevation over time. There's a blue line and a brown line. The blue line is the south arm of Great Salt Lake, and the brown line is the north arm of Great Salt Lake. Can anyone tell me why there are 2 arms of the lake? What bisects the lake? Railroad causeway. Yep, Union Pacific Railroad created a railroad that went across the causeway in the beginning of the 1900s. It was originally a wooden trestle, and then they decided that was too hard to maintain, but stood up to salinity really well. And so then they started filling the causeway with rock, boxcars, cars, whatever they could to create this rock-filled causeway that is a full-time job just to keep up so the trains can keep going past. The causeway does have a breach in it, which has been a very important management tool in recent years. So, as I mentioned, in 2021, the lake hit its new historic low, and then it surpassed that again in 2022. We have seen historically about 2 million acre feet come into the lake each year. It's a lot of water, but in 2021 and 2022, we saw less than 1 million acre feet. So while we've had this quote historic time where we have all this inflows, we're seeing less and less over time. And we don't just, average is no longer average anymore. And then, so right now at this current lake level elevation, we see about 1 million acre feet is 1 foot in rise. So you can just think how much water is needed to raise the Great Salt Lake 1 foot. All right, well, if you didn't feel that Great Salt Lake was important enough when I showed you the shrimp and the Coke can, I just wanted to highlight a few other important parts. We've mentioned, or in a presentation I was just in, we were talking about the ecological significance of Great Salt Lake. It's vastly important for migrating shorebirds. We have about 10 million migratory birds that pass through Great Salt Lake each year, 330 species. So as other terminal lakes in the West are drying up, Great Salt Lake becomes even more and more important because it's kind of the stop for all, it contains all the good stuff for migrating shorebirds. It's brine shrimp and brine flies. When you guys go on a road trip in Utah, do you have a preferred gas station that you like to stop at? Say Maverick. Maverick. Yeah, totally. I like to stop at all the Mavericks. I feel like the Great Salt Lake is like the Maverick of stops for shorebirds, or for all birds. So I feel like, yeah, the Great Salt Lake is one big Maverick for our shorebirds. By the way, did you know that when you go into a Maverick now, they have Great Salt Lake as part of their murals in the adventure stop for the lake, in all Mavericks? I thought that was pretty remarkable. Anyway, brine shrimp, I mentioned the aquaculture is a very important industry, but it's also the fuel source for these migrating shorebirds and waterfowl. So without these brine shrimp, these birds wouldn't be able to eat all they can and continue on their migratory journey. We also have important recreation amenities with hunting and birding, water activities when we can get boats out from the marinas. And then the mineral extraction industry is about a $1.3 billion contribution to the local economy each year. So all of these things aren't just important for us here in Utah, but just around the world. The contribution of Great Salt Lake is unique and can't be surpassed. So one of the crazy things, when COVID hit and we were all locked in our rooms or our houses, and I just remember I was working with the state on a request for proposals to get a marketing agency or an advertising firm to help me get the word out about Great Salt Lake and the importance of it. And just, what's a PR? Give me a PR strategy on how to do that. Well, then lo and behold, the lake dropped to its historic low, and these concerns really started to resonate with people. And we no longer needed the PR firm. Mother Nature did that for us. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of the concerns from my perspective, and then we can talk about what we're doing about all of this. So ecological problems of high salinity. So if the south arm of the lake, which is the lake to the south of the railroad causeway, if it gets too high, the brine shrimp and the brine flies die. And then they're very hard. They may struggle to live, struggle to reproduce. Their cysts may exist in the soil for some time, but the migrating shorebirds won't have adequate food for their migratory journey. So what you would then see is a population die-off. And then you would see an endangered species listing. And so right now we don't have a lot of federal connections to Great Salt Lake with regard to the federal government. We have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that has the Bear River Wildlife Refuge. We have USGS that's helping with some mapping and monitoring, and a couple other bits of involvement here and there, but we don't have a ton of mandatory things that are saying you need to do X, Y, and Z on the lake. And if we get an ESA listing, then we will have that mandate, and we will need to come up with additional funds, and we will have to do additional work to make sure that we're saving these little Wilson's phalarope ropes. This is the Wilson phalarope rope, cute little guy. There's a couple other species of birds, the eared grebe and the snowy plover, who aren't far behind in their threat to survival along the Pacific Flyway. So, the ESA listing is one. The other The other thing is the dust hotspots, and I'm sure you've all heard in the news recently about Great Salt Lake dust, and so many things to say about this. I could spend all day, but I won't. One thing I'll say is just what we started considering what the problem was, or what the potential problem was with dust on the Great Salt Lake lake bed back in 2015, when they wanted to, when the Division of Facilities Management of the state of Utah came and they said, we want to put a prison on the shores of Great Salt Lake. Is there anything that we should be concerned about? We're like, well, bugs maybe, and dust. We should probably think about dust but then at that time we thought, well, for sure the lake is going to go up. There's not going to be, we're not going to have these problems. But there was enough concern that we hired a researcher to start going out on the lake bed to identify, what's in the dust, where the dust is. And so he identified all of these hot spots. Well, the places, the lake is really divided into 4 segments. There's the north arm, the south arm, but there's also Bear River Bay and Farmington Bay. Farmington Bay and Bear River Bay are these bays on the side. And at low lake levels, they're the things that are exposed the most. And guess what? They're also the areas that are closest to our urban populations. So these are the hot spots. So this is, I think undoubtedly the thing that has grabbed the most attention for Great Salt Lake concerns. So like I said, Mother Nature helped us out. And we, in 2021 and 2022, people started paying attention to Great Salt Lake. And I think there were many of us that were ready. We had a lot of information and a lot of research about why why Great Salt Lake is important, what it means to us. And now all we need, now that people are paying attention and concerned, now we need the tools to fix the problem. And we've done a lot over the last couple of years. We've been lucky enough to have the support of some of our legislators, and we've had over $1 billion of investment in Great Salt Lake. But the more I look into saline lake rehabilitation in the United States and around the world, so that's a drop in the bucket. So we've got a lot of work to do, but we have now a Great Salt Lake commissioner who's kind of like the guru over all of the agencies and all of the departments that are working on Great Salt Lake issues, kind of like the herder of all the cats. We've invested money in agricultural optimization. So how do we get our upstream water users to use water more wisely? Also the same with secondary meters, installing those where people didn't have any idea how much water they were using in some of these less urban areas. Did you know that when people are putting secondary water meters on their systems, even without a rate increase, just knowing how much water they use, they're saving around 30% of their water use because of just by simply putting them on and knowing how much water they're using. The berm has been an important tool when the lake gets too salty. This very high-tech tool called a backhoe goes and fills up the lake, or fills in the causeway breach and stops the flow of super salty north arm water from moving south and stops the south arm water from moving north. So we have less concentrate or more dilute water in the south arm. We also created Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, which is a group that is helping put money towards water leasing. And so willing leasers upstream can lease their water to Great Salt Lake on a temporary basis. And then what I wanted to talk to you all about today is my project, which is the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. And this is a plan that's looking at water supply and demand in the Great Salt Lake Basin on a basin-wide level. And this hasn't been done before, and it hasn't been done before for several reasons, which I will tell you about in a second. But the quick answer is it's complicated. But I think the other thought is, for a time, we've got our water managers in the Weber Basin, we've got our water managers in the Bear River Basin, Jordan River, and everyone's kind of been focused on their own on their own basin, on their own cities, but it's time, I think, as we're looking to save Great Salt Lake, to think more collectively and more holistically about how, we're all in this together and we're all one basin, and we need to start thinking about water as one water rather than, your basin, my basin. So this is highlighting the complexity. One second. I'll just let these numbers sink in. So the square miles of the basin is complicated. And I don't know how many of you, when you have stakeholders with some of your projects, if you've got like a project that's, got a couple mile radius, how many people, concerned citizens, are involved in that? Well, this is a project area of 36,000 square miles. So you've got lots of opinions and uses and things that are happening in the basin. And so just understanding just understanding the use at that level is pretty massive. Lots of states, lots of cities, lots of counties. You can see all the numbers. But one of the fascinating things that I've learned in recent years when I'm talking about the other terminal saline lakes, has anyone ever heard of or been to Mono Lake in California? Raise your hand. Awesome. Okay. So they've been working to save Mono Lake for many years, and they've had some pretty good successes, and they work closely with LADWP on making sure that there's sufficient water in the lake. But guess how many water rights holders there are in that basin with Mono Lake? There's one. That's LADWP. We have 150,000 water users. So and seeing the struggles that LADWP and the State Water Resources in California have with just working with one water user on commitments, negotiations that they would agree to, in dry years or wet years. They have one water user. We have 150 water rights. And so how do we make connections with all these folks? And then you add the human element into this. We have 2.6 humans living around the basin, farmland, urban areas, wetlands, behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes. And I think this one's huge. Many of us come from families who've been here for many years, and they're doing things the way they have been doing it, business as usual. I've heard lots of people that say, I'll conserve my water, but then they're just going to take it downstream for that new townhome development. And so I'm just going to use my water because I'm entitled to it. So if we have people with these values and these beliefs that maybe what they can or what they do won't make a difference, how do we reach them and let them know that together, collectively, we can all have an impact on the lake? To further add to the complexity of the issue is all the players that are involved in Great Salt Lake. And this is just a graphic illustrating the players on the lake. This isn't even up into the basin. But in the center of this, you have the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council and the Watershed Council. And they're kind of overseeing all of the lake stuff. The dots are a lot of the major projects that are going on in the lake. But you see all these different divisions within the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Environmental Quality, and they all have different mandates, and they're all managing for certain things, and they're all not, we work together now better than I have ever seen in my almost 20 years working with them. It's been super awesome to see the collaboration and connection, but still there's the heart of what these agencies' missions are. They're going to fulfill those. And then below are federal partners. Like I said, we work with them somewhat, but don't have a lot of the mandates coming from the federal government. So far, they've just been our partners in play and management. So anyway, this is a great graphic that illustrates how I think that we should think about the basin, right? And it's also a very simple graphic. It's kind of like back to grade school and the water cycle. We like thinking that the water starts in the mountains, ends up down in the lake. We're all connected. And so this Great Salt Lake Basin integrated plan that I'm working on is looking at how changes in water use within the basin. So say we change how we manage groundwater or how we use our agricultural water. What does that do to the wetlands of Great Salt Lake? Or what does that do for wetland flows to the wetlands? And so just looking at the supply and the demand in the basin and figuring out how that impacts all water users, not just Great Salt Lake. So I feel kind of comforted and at home saying this with this group of people, because I work with a bunch of engineers and a lot of biologists and a lot of people that curse planning. They're like, oh, why do we need another plan? Well, this is a plan for a plan. So that is super crazy. Like, top that. It's like it's a plan before you do your general plan. Anyway, this is the work plan for the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. And this was kind of mandated when HB 429 came out in 2022 that said you need to do this integrated water assessment that's looking at the supply and the demand in the Great Salt Lake Basin. But because this involves so much work and so much coordination, you need to prepare a plan for this plan. So we did that. Oh, and I should also say that we've actually, because we got the funding from the legislature to do this, at the same time we also went to the Bureau of Reclamation and got a Water Smart grant. And so they're able to fund and put in money for a basin study, which is a project that they do looking at supply and demand in specific regions in the West. So we combined in this one super project, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, and the plan for the plan is on our website, and down below, way down here, is our website. And so you can check out the work plan. But the goal of the plan is to ensure a resilient water supply for not only Great Salt Lake, but for all the water uses in the watershed. And that includes people and environment. And I feel strange saying this when I go talk to people because honestly, this isn't a plan just to save Great Salt Lake. We got the funding for this project because of the situation of Great Salt Lake, but I don't want people to think that we're only here to consider the lake as the winner. I think ultimately we want all people. We want to be able to grow. We want to be able to maintain agriculture, but we need to do it all. So there are, if there are trade-offs, if there are winners and losers, what's acceptable, and how do we work through that? So the objectives for the integrated plan are to forge connections. Like I said, we have a massive amount of stakeholders in the basin. Another reason why I think this has never been done, because how do you herd that many cats in all of the different basins? And I think ultimately, this project is we're going to need buy-off from the large water users in the basin. They're going to need to support this plan. And so making those connections and seeing them through this process is going to be vital. Develop a shared understanding, kind of like I said, like it's not just an agricultural problem. It's not just an M&I problem. It's not just a mineral extraction industry problem. It's all of our problems. And so how do we maintain the shared understanding going forward? What are the water resources in the basin? Well, we know what the supply is now sort of in the basin. Like we have the Weber River measures water one way, the Bear another. So just getting all of the measurement, the quantification on the same page and using the same tool, super important. And then what would it look like with other changes in climate? And then what are some options? If we start to tweak water use in one way, how does that impact other ways? And like I said, what's acceptable there? And then once this group that we forge these connections with decides what's acceptable, we can recommend some actions that we can take during high water years, low water years. So that's our objectives. Like I said, this is going to take a village. The Great Salt Lake Commissioner, do you guys know the Hobbit very well? Is it Frodo? Who's the ruler that has the rings? Zara. Okay. So that's like Great Salt Lake Commissioner, right? So he's the one, the ring that rules them all. Yes, that's him. His name's Brian Steed. And so he's kind of over all of this. And like I said, kind of over all of the efforts that all of the state, federal, all of our partners are working on. But we ultimately hope that this will be his plan. This will be his long-term strategy moving forward. He can adopt some of these projects' principles to his, as he's looking to manage the sustainability of the lake. Water Resources, the Bureau of Reclamation are leading it. And then we have all these other groups, because all of the other needs in the basin, each of the different basins are unique. We want to hear, what are the concerns of Great Salt Lake, specifically the Bear River, the Jordan River, and then we can do that through the watershed councils. And these are groups that are managed by the Division of Water Resources. And we meet with them regularly to understand what their issues are and kind of bring issues forward. Then we have these technical teams that work on the modeling tool that's being created for the project. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So all of you planners know there's like steps in the planning process. Each one's different. If you have a NEPA project with a National Environmental Policy Act, you've got a certain process you have to follow. This is the process that we are working on with the integrated plan. Right now, we're working on developing the performance measures. So what is good, what is bad, for what resource, then modeling the existing conditions. So I'm working with a team of engineers to create a monster model. I'm not a monster or an engineer, but I am working with all these engineers to help me build a tool that will help us analyze scenarios, and we can understand changes in flow to the lake and changes in salinity when we have this tool created. So the tool looks at things like climate, the hydrologic conditions in each of the basins, what the demands are, so we can change the demands if the population increases by 50,000 or 10 million. And then we develop it and put it in this planning model, this scenario model called Riverware. We're working on that right now. And then we conduct this trade-off analysis once we have our agreed upon scenarios that we're running. So then we evaluate those alternatives with our stakeholders. We say, what does this mean to you? How does this look? And who are the winners? Who are the losers in some of these situations? And if we tweak something a little bit, is it okay to win a little bit? And is it okay to lose a little bit? And then after that, we'll develop recommendations with our water users. So what could some of these alternatives or options be in the integrated plan? So we could say we're going to reduce all non-functional turf, or we're going to get rid of all golf courses. I mean, these are just pretend. Nothing here is set in stone, but these are just things that we could consider. So if we make these choices, then what would that mean to Great Salt Lake runoff, and to just, how much water is left in the rivers if these changes are made? So if we reduce all uses by 5%, by 50%, what does that mean for water supply in the area? If we look at reuse, which is something that is definitely considered in other states, how does that impact Great Salt Lake? If we pull more water from the Colorado River, which, as I'm sure you guys would probably gather, that's not too likely right now given the challenges they're facing. But if we did do that, what would that mean? Did you guys know that we get water from the Colorado River that makes it to Great Salt Lake? Isn't that wacky? It's true. It comes from Strawberry Reservoir. It's pumped over there and then ends up down in Utah Lake and then to Great Salt Lake. And then, what if we, around the shores of Great Salt Lake, we have a bunch of waterfowl management areas which contain very valuable wetlands. What if management of those areas is altered? How would that change water levels upstream and downstream? So, okay, I think you've got the process well enough. So once we do these alternatives, we'll be coming around with an actionable plan. So hopefully in a couple of years, I can come to you guys with a plan because right now I don't know what the outcome is going to be and what we're going to say. You know, I think with planning, you can say, well, you're going to have a R1 zone here, and you're going to have this zone here and that zone here. But with this planning process, we're just not quite sure what the recommendations are. I have some ideas, but not 100% sure. But it is not until the end of, because the creation of the model is going to take a minute. It's not until about 2027 that we're going to have this project complete. So I do look forward to coming back to APA and talking about the successes in integrated water management, because I think it's really important. But also another, I could spend a whole other session talking about all of these other projects that you see here. So when we did the plan for the plan, or the work plan, we did a gap analysis that said, like, what do we not know about Great Salt Lake? What are the things that we need to better understand to help inform management decisions on the lake? And so these were the projects that rose to the top, that were evaluated by our steering committee, by our advisory group. These are the ones that we said, okay, we need to do these. And so these projects are underway right now, and we'll have results from these to help inform the planning process. So I'm super excited. Like, we have this dust control project that's about to be unveiled, and it's looking at what are the opportunities and costs for dust control. So knowing what we know about some of the other terminal lakes, how did they mitigate for dust? What techniques did they use? How much did it cost per square mile? One of the wacky things is when we went to learn about Mono Lake, we went to Owens Lake, and Owens Lake is really just a puddle now. But it is also, the water from there goes to feed LA County. When I think about Owens Lake now, I think about it as like a dust playground, like it's a dust mitigation playground, because it's all these different quadrants, and they use all these different types of strategies to mitigate dust, from like gravel, sprinklers, vegetation, you name it, they have it. Like, they have like just, sheet flow of a small amount of water, deeper amounts of water. They till the soil, which supposedly stops dust instead of makes it more. So anyway, we have a lot of exciting projects. How can we further optimize our agricultural water in the basin, and maybe send some of that water down to Great Salt Lake? How much water do we need to keep in our streams to keep them healthy and viable for our fish populations that are living upstream from Great Salt Lake? So this is Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan in a nutshell. And we're hard at work on that. We've got a lot of folks working on this. And but I think the takeaway that I want to provide you today is that we're integrating the watershed, thinking about one water, one community. It's not just us against them. And I think that's how we need to think about water planning in the space of planning, whether it's urban planning or rural planning in general. And the Division of Water Resources has been working on this mantra and thinking about things in this way. And I have a couple of projects that I wanted to share with you that really illustrate the integration, or actually mandate the importance of water planning into land planning. In 2022, when everything, I think up at the legislature on Capitol Hill, they were like, what can we do for the lake? And so a lot of people were really interested in supporting efforts. And one of the things that that was thought about was making sure that communities really consider how water will be impacted in their general plans. And so this requires most municipalities, I believe it's there's one exemption of cities. Is it 5C cities, Haley?
It's anyone with a population of 10,000 or greater.
I'll introduce Haley in just one second. Anyway, most municipalities and counties need to develop a water use and preservation element in all of their general plans. This was actually fleshed out a little more. They added a piece in 2023 that said you need to look at how your how water in use in your communities will impact Great Salt Lake. So of course that doesn't necessarily pertain to folks down in southern Utah, but I believe they have some sort of exemption. Anyway, this incorporation into general plans needs to be done by the end of this year. Has anyone dealt with this that's in this room? Has anyone had, okay. Hopefully that was, that process went okay for you. So you can learn more about the legislative requirements and get more information about this process on our website. And then Haley is here. If you haven't worked with her, she can help you out too, as this is what she lives and breathes. So the other thing that other tool that I think has been vital in integrating water planning into land planning is this Growing Water Smart workshops. And this was actually initially funded first by the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, who in the early 2000s, we were like, oh, we need to get communities to start thinking about, how their water use impacts Great Salt Lake. And so, and then maybe if they reduce their water use, they could dedicate and deliver that water to Great Salt Lake. And so what would that look like? So in 2022, we started doing these Growing Water Smart workshops. USU led them primarily. Has anyone been to a Growing Water Smart workshop that's in here? No? Okay. I think they've had 2 rounds, and they're looking to do some more. Fortunately, requiring additional funding for this will be challenging in the near future, I believe. But this is a great project because I don't know how many of you, I was on a planning commission for a time in South Salt Lake, actually, and I remember asking one of the applicants, how do you know that your development is going to have enough water to supply all these residences in this multi-story building? And they're like, oh, well, we're going to increase the diameter of the pipe. And I'm like, no, but how do you know that there's enough water in our system to supply? And I don't think that even the planners in a lot of the planning departments don't really think about the availability of water. They may think about the size of the pipe, but how do we make sure that there's adequate water for our communities, that the conservancy districts are, have adequate water supply? And so I think this workshop brings these people together who haven't traditionally talked a lot to each other about how water may impact the work that they do, and kind of puts them on the same page. And so there are these 3-day workshops, and they offer, the group offers a guidebook, materials, and they offer follow-up support. So they'll come check in with you, I think 6 months down the road, and just ask how these efforts are going, and hopefully you're seeing some water savings, or at least some conservation efforts that are working. So again, you can get more information about this on our website. But that's all I have. And I didn't even look at the clock. I didn't know how to talk. Oh, wow, that was perfect. I'm supposed to leave 15 minutes for questions, and it's exactly 3:45. So, yes.
So years ago, there was an article in the Deseret News that said the Great Salt Lake helps bring more.
I'm supposed to give you that. Sorry, there's people online.
So there's an article in the Deseret News that said the Great Salt Lake helps bring 10% of our snowfall to the Great Salt, or to the valleys, right? Just because of the way it acts as a sort of a, microclimate, and so as storms come across, it encourages them to drop more water. So I was just curious if that's true. I mean, by having the Great Salt Lake, we actually bring more snow to the mountains. So it is kind of like a additive sort of system.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very true. I'll take that unless you have more questions. I think you might, but anyway, so that's what when I was mentioning earlier, the lake effect snow, 5 to 8% of the snow that falls in the Wasatch is from this lake effect snow, where the air pulls the moisture off of Great Salt Lake and then deposit up into the mountains. So that does create more runoff for us, more snow to ski on, and then more runoff throughout the year. Exactly how much, so like we're still working on quantifying, like if the lake shrinks by X percent, how much less lake effect snow do we get? We don't have specific numbers like that says, you know, if the lake went down 5 more feet, how much lake effect snow would we lose? We don't have that yet because it just varies every year depending on the climate and the snowfall of the year. So good question. Yes, your question.
I will try to talk loud so you don't have to carry that up here. Really, two things. I was in a conference with Brian Steed in March, and he shared an example of in California how ESA endangered fish really put the hurt on a development project. It brought into perspective how big of an issue it really could be if that bird or something in the Great Salt Lake got that designation. Maybe you could share that, because that really, in my views, it for me. And the second would just be how the water exaction for indoor use is part of this integration plan, where we're all trying to shift from the 0.45 exaction, which we know is way too high, to maybe more of a realization, like a real use.
Okay, I think I will repeat both questions for those online. So the first question was, Brian Steed mentioned in March about a fish that was listed in another saline lake, and it kind of put the hurt on the managers because then it required them to do many things, which maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise. And then I will answer that question first. So I'm not exactly sure what fish or what area he was talking about, because with Great Salt Lake, obviously there aren't fish that live in there. It's way too salty. But the bird example that I gave you, if that were to happen, if the ESA listing came down for the Wilson's phalarope, we would be in that same kind of herd. And that means, you know, the state would need to come up with, right now we're actually working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on a conservation agreement. So how we think we can manage the species without the mandates, without the you shall do this. And actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because we have been working with Fish and Wildlife on this, and just last week we received notice that environmental advocacy groups feel like the federal government is not moving fast enough to declare whether the phalarope should be on the ESA list or not. And so they're going to file a lawsuit with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to speed up the process. I'm not sure that's going to happen, that the process will be sped up, but I think that's just further highlighting the point that the efforts need to be taken. So yes, we're aware of that potential hurt, and that's something I think we're all trying to avoid. And the second question was about exaction and the exaction rates for indoor water use. Is that correct? Okay. One of the things that I've been learning so much about in the last couple of years is with water use and Great Salt Lake is actually the water that you use indoors is a very small amount of water that's lost in the system. Actually, if you use water inside to wash your dishes or flush your toilets, that water goes into the sewer system, is treated and released to Great Salt Lake. And so while we would like to see that indoor use conserved, because we're just all using less water in the system, it's the outdoor water use that is really impactful for our users or for the lake, as that water is lost to evaporation. So I'm not, I guess, and I'm not super familiar with exaction rates on water, so I don't know if I can answer that, but I think my overall comment would be reducing indoor water use would be great, but the most helpful thing that we could do is reduce outdoor water use in the basin to avoid evaporation. Anything else? Oh, okay, way in the back. Last one.
Hey, you talked a lot about dust from the Great Salt Lake today. how do you think of your relationship with, say, big mining operations that might be also meant to lead dust to the basin, so causing their dust at your lake as part of this plan, right? Because I'm sure it's all sort of big daddy.
Yeah, so the question was what are our relationships with the other mining operations that may be around the lake, and how does that contribute to Great Salt Lake dust? And we know that that the gravel pit, between Salt Lake City and North Salt Lake, can blow some pretty serious dust from off of their project site on the weekends when they don't spray for water. And so, we know that a lot of the industries around the lake are, they may have dust mitigation plans, but maybe it's kind of that ask down the road that we're all in this together, and they need to be more proactive in how they take care of their dust, and then we'll take care of our dust, and we'll take care of our dust. But one of the remarkable things about Great Salt Lake Basin and the dust is a lot of times, well, in recent years, and I can't say for this exact year, I'm not 100% sure, but in the last couple of years, a lot of the dust that we're getting is blowing up from the south from dry, severe lake beds. So there used to be severe lake, right? And so that's been dry for some time. And so that dust is really, the potential for it to be airborne is more. It's in Great Salt Lake, it's a little less, especially in the North Arm, because the North Arm has the thicker layer of salt. And so that helps keep the salt or the dust down because there's such a thick layer of crust. But over years, if the lake were continue to stay low and low and low, that salt would be eroded and the dust would become more airborne. So, yes.
You showed in your graph that agriculture water use has not only been the majority, but it's staying consistently high, whereas residential use is staying the same or decreasing, even though the population is increasing exponentially. What is the state doing to mitigate agricultural use, whether it's changing crop usage, buying out leases, or something? It seems like municipal population is doing its part and more. Agriculture is getting worse and worse and worse.
Great question. So the question for those online is that agriculture use is so much higher than all of the other uses, while other uses are decreasing. Theirs is staying relatively the same. What are they doing to combat this? And in your question, you also mentioned two strategies that we are encouraging and that have been done in some cases. Changing crop type, yes. Fallowing in some instances, although I should not say the F word. Is not fallowing. It's just foregoing a crop rotation, right? So, and then water leasing is another one. And I think in 2022, 2021, the legislature did put a large portion of money aside for agricultural water optimization, so to help farmers switch from irrigation methods that were more water intensive to become less water intensive. But it's being in a room of pretty heavily people who are heavily focused on municipalities, municipal use. The agriculture community is feeling really targeted, and like they have some pressure on them. And I don't know if you, like in conflict, when you get pressured, you pull back. And so there's just this working with them and helping them understand, kind of this we're all connected thing, and just taking some time to help them understand how their changes in crop types, their rotational grazing could help with Great Salt Lake elevations, and why that matters to them is something that we want to highlight the importance of. Okay. Yes.
You want me to use the mic?
You're so close. You might as well.
Okay. So we established that it affects our climate. So is there a way to quantify our summer heating energy bills, like how much more air conditioning we used as the Great Salt Lake reduces? So, if you add up everybody's, if the valley goes up 2 degrees or 1 degree,
Mhm.
what does that mean in terms of electricity bills for the whole valley? I mean, are you quantifying that as part of your study?
No, that's a great thought. I think we're happy to have the climate data that we have that is looking at the increase in temperature in the valley, but how that's correlated with, increases in energy use, we haven't seen that yet. So maybe we could put Pacificor on that to help us out.
Yeah, $1 billion.
Yeah, could. All right. Any other questions? Last burning issues, concerns? All right, you guys, thank you so much for letting me come talk about water with all the planners in the world.